right. Does that make sense? Okay, good. So last up, we have a good friend of mine. At one point, I was described by some salty folks online as Rod Dreher's podcast sidekick. Low-key, kind of the best day of my life. I mean, that was pretty cool. Always, it was good stuff. So they were not happy with something you and I had said on General Eclectic, but alas, those days are gone. Rod is in Eastern Europe these days. He's been living in Hungary, but as you know from his books and his ability to write a lot. He writes and writes and writes and writes, and I think it's his method, of course, of making sense. And so many of us have found Rod's public sense-making to be generative and fruitful. So for tonight, he's going to come and he's going to sort of round off our panel discussion. So please welcome Rod Dreher.
Well, thank you, Kale. You may or may not know this, but Kale and I are both South Louisiana guys, and we share a birthday. But we've been February 14th, so we've been friends for a while, and Kale's friendship is one of the great blessings of my life, and I'm so happy to be here. I'm going to talk to you today about a film that is very close to my heart, and I think it plays in perfectly with the topic and the themes of our meeting. We're talking this weekend about fellowship in the Spirit, about our longing for community, and obstacles to finding community. Saving wisdom can come to us from the strangest places, if we're open to it. This was my experience with one of the most profound films I've ever seen, one that has had more effect on my life, in particular my life as a Christian, than any other. It's an obscure and difficult Russian-Italian movie that you almost certainly have never seen, but that I've seen a number of times and have bored my Substack readers to death talking about. It's called Nostalgia, and it was the first film the great Soviet director Andrei Tarkovsky made in the 1980s after his exile from the Soviet Union. Even fans of Tarkovsky's better-known works, Andrei Rubliov, Stalker, and Solaris, struggle with this one. But for me, it's second only to Dante's Divine Comedy and how the Holy Spirit used art to reach deep into my soul and draw me out of the dark wood of my own head. I want to tell you today about this movie and what it has to say to us lonely, sometimes alienated people who are struggling with the meaning crisis. So Tarkovsky made this film about himself and his own loneliness in his exile in Italy and in the West more generally. He was very far from his native Russia and his family, and he suffered a lot of inner pain because he could not communicate well with the people of this foreign land. It wasn't just about language. It was about a lack of shared culture, of shared sensibilities, and it really pained him that he could be living there among people he was close to and not cross that barrier in some important way. So in the film, the protagonist is a Russian writer named Andrei Gorchikov, who is in Italy doing research for a book about a Russian composer of the past who had lived in exile in Italy, but who had eventually returned home out of nostalgia for what he had left behind. Yet Gorchikov, the writer, is so paralyzed by his own nostalgia that he could not work. He was there in Italy to do research, and he couldn't focus on anything. He couldn't get out of his head. The director, Tarkovsky, once told an interviewer, the title of Nostalgia denotes yearning for something which is far away from us, for those worlds which cannot be united. But it is also the yearning for our native home, for a sense of spiritual belonging. It's a longing for heaven, yes, but it's also a longing to belong to a community. And this is what the writer Gorchikov desperately craves. Here's an important point about the concept of nostalgia as Tarkovsky means it. He told an interviewer, quote, And we Russians, for us, nostalgia is not a gentle and benevolent emotion as it is for you Italians. For us, it is a sort of deadly disease, a mortal illness, a profound compassion that binds us not so much with our own privation, our longing, our separation, but rather with the suffering of others, a passionate empathy, unquote. For Russians, nostalgia is not just a longing to the past, but it is a melancholic phenomenon tied tightly to spiritual yearning, especially spiritual yearning for ultimate harmony. In the film, Gorchikov's nostalgia is not simply about missing Russia and his family back home. It's about the struggle to find meaning, to find unity, and to make connection in a fragmented world. The drama in the movie is about Gorchikov's inner struggle for belonging and how he finds his way out of the prison of his own mind. Now, this struggle has important lessons for us. Please forgive me for all of the exposition I'm going to have to provide you to bring out the film's meaning and to explain how it relates to our problems, but this is all going to become clear soon enough. The film Nostalgia opens in a misty field outside a country church. Gorchikov has asked his Italian translator, Eugenia, to drive him out to this church so he can see a famous 15th century fresco of a Madonna pregnant with the Christ child. Gorchikov wants to go because he's thinking about his pregnant wife back home and wants to be reminded of her. Pious Italian Catholics in the film see this fresco as a fertility image. So when Eugenia and Gorchikov arrive, the writer is so overwhelmed by depression that he can't even get out of the car and cross the field to enter the church. So Eugenia goes in anyway. Inside the mysterious country church, Eugenia, who's a modern woman from Rome, very sophisticated and cosmopolitan, she witnesses a strange rite, almost pagan. A group of black-clad peasant women are proceeding down a side aisle of the crypt towards the fresco. They're chanting and carrying on a platform a statue of the pregnant Virgin Mary. They are there to pray to the Mother of God, asking her for intercession so that they might become pregnant. Again, they see this as some sort of weird quasi-pagan fertility image. So Eugenia is intensely curious about what's going on there. And as we later discover, she deeply desires to be married and presumably to have children. But as a sophisticated cosmopolitan feminist, she cannot bring herself to join those prayerful peasants. A kindly older sacristan approaches Eugenia and asks her if she's there to pray, seeking to be pregnant. No, she says, I'm just looking. She's standing aside. She's just observing. He gently responds to her, if there are any casual onlookers who are not supplicants, that is, one who comes with humility to petition God, quote, then nothing happens. What is supposed to happen, she asks. Whatever you want, whatever you most need, he says, but you have to at least kneel. Eugenia tries very briefly to kneel, but she can't manage it. She lacks faith. More to the point, she lacks the capacity for humble sacrifice. She won't even sacrifice her pride enough to kneel. Soon after, she asks the sacristan why women pray more often than men. Well, you should know, he replies. He's just a simple country cleric. Well, she doesn't know, suggesting in Tarkovsky's anti-feminist view that she is alienated from her true nature as the generator and nurturer of life. The sacristan tells her in an almost trembling voice that women are meant to bear children and to raise them with patience and sacrifice. Is that all we're good for? Eugenia demands. I don't know, replies the sacristan. This implies that they might have other roles, but their primary role is a generator of life and a nurturer of new life. Well, Eugenia, the feminist, is really offended, and she whirls around and turns to leave. Wait, he says, you want to be happy, but there are more important things in life than happiness. Well, that scene sets up the film's core lessons. First, it shows us through Gorchikov's inability to enter the church that an unwillingness even to open ourselves to encounters with others guarantees that we will be bound to our isolation. Second, it shows through Eugenia's own self-imposed barriers to change. She's unwilling to participate in a Christian ritual that she apparently finds weird and low-class and beneath her. Third, she rejects the simple sacristan as a potential source of wisdom because he offends her in her feminist beliefs. He might have been wrong about it, but she won't even talk to him after that. She gets her feelings hurt. And fourth, she cannot or will not humble herself in any kind of sacrifice, however small, for the sake of talking to God, of petitioning God. And finally, she makes personal happiness her greatest good, when she ought to make more serious things, like the search for God or the search for the truth, her highest goal. As you know, it's well established in wisdom literature, as well as in contemporary social science, that happiness is the byproduct of the search for other things, or the commitment to other things. So as the film continues, we get to know Gorchikov as a man who is paralyzed by his life in Italy. As I said, he's there to research a book, but he is indifferent, insensible to all the beauty around him, because all he can think about is home and that sense of harmony he felt there. There's a long, silent scene of Gorchikov settling down in his hotel room in Tuscany. Tarkovsky, the director, uses one simple gesture, Gorchikov reflexively reaching for a light switch that isn't there, to convey to the viewer that his protagonist is physically present in that hotel room, but in his mind, he's dwelling somewhere else. That is, at home in Russia, where he automatically knows where the light switch is. So Gorchikov and Eugenia settle in a hotel next to an ancient thermal bath called Bagno Vignoni. It is said that St. Catherine of Sienna once took the waters there. While they're there, they meet Dominico, a local madman, a harmless man of late middle age, but still a fool. Because Tarkovsky is Russian, you know that this fool is probably what the Russian Orthodox call a holy fool, a madman through which God will reveal something important. So we learned that Domenico used to be a father and a husband, but was so afraid of some coming apocalypse that he kept his wife and children hostage in an old house in a village to try to protect them from disaster. After 7 years, the police found out about it and set them free. Of course, they fled their jailer, Domenico, who now lives in the leaky ruins of the house and wanders the town, confused, alienated, and misunderstood. Gorchikov visits Domenico in his ruined house. The main thing that we, the viewer, notice is that the roof leaks badly. But Domenico has bottles and other containers everywhere to try to capture the water. It's as if he cannot bear to let the flow of life pass unimpeded. He has to try to control the flow, and it has made him crazy. Yet somehow, Gorchikov feels a deep, unspoken connection to this tormented man and tries to befriend him. They're both strangers in a strange land. The filmmaker gives us signs and symbols that tell us what tortures Domenico is the same thing that tortures Gorchikov, a profound desire for harmony and connection. On the wall of his hovel, Domenico has scrawled graffiti that reads, 1 + 1 = 1, that two, in his ideal, two can come together to form a unity. Well, it emerges that Eugenia, the translator, is in love with her Russian client, but he cannot get him to show any interest in her. Now, it's true that Gorchikov is married, but we get the impression that his lack of romantic interest in Eugenia is not so much out of personal virtue as it is a function of his being dead to the world, a brain on a stick. For her part, she seems incapable of understanding why a lonely man would deny himself the happiness of sex with his wife so far away. Remember what the sacristan told her, that she wants happiness more than anything, but there are more important things in life than happiness. Eugenia sees Gorchikov as a man who will deliver her from her loneliness if only he'll pay attention to her. He will deliver her from her unhappiness, so she suffers from her inability to connect with him. This movie is about barriers and borders and the difficulties we have crossing them to make a peaceful, harmonious, life-giving connection. In the film's key moment, Gorchikov, drunk and despairing, makes his way into a ruined medieval country church. A clear water spring runs through the church, inundating it. Our hero has found his way into a kind of island in the nave where he drains a bottle of vodka and burns a book of Russian poetry that has been translated into Italian. This symbolizes Gorchikov sacrificing his hope of communicating fully across linguistic and cultural barriers. He gives up. He can't do it. And then, in his drunken slumber, the writer has a dream. In the dream, he traverses the nave of the ruin of a different medieval church, an abbey church. Around him, the beauty of the interior, yeah, there it is, this is the scene. The beauty of the interior, which lacks a roof, calls out for his gaze, but he doesn't look up. Lost in thought, Gorchikov only looks down at the earth, but he's also praying silently. So we hear, remember this is a dream, we hear a conversation between St. Catherine and the Lord. St. Catherine, Lord, do you see how he's asking? Say something to him. God says, but what would happen if he heard my voice? St. Catherine, well, let him feel your presence. God, I always do, but he's not aware of it. Now, this is important. In fact, this is the key moment of the entire film. God really is present, and he's trying to connect with this poor man. But Gorchikov is so trapped inside his own head that he cannot open himself to this sacred connection. Sad and defeated, the writer decides to abandon his Italian project and return home to Russia. But then, something amazing happens. Earlier in the film, the holy fool Dominico asks Gorchikov to complete a task for him. Dominico has been trying to cross that thermal bath holding a lit candle, going from one side to the other. This, Dominico believes, is a ritual necessary to save the world from apocalypse. But every time he tries, the people of the town stop him, seeing this attempted gesture nothing more than the pointless act of a crazy man. Would you carry the candle for me? He asks Gorchikov, who agrees to do it. So just as he's about to leave his hotel for the airport, Gorchikov finds the half-burned candle in his coat and decides to delay his departure to go home to what he thought would make him happy for the sake of carrying out this act for Dominico. There's no reason for it at all. He doesn't know where Dominico is, and besides, it's crazy. Nevertheless, Gorchikov decides to complete the task as a gesture of love and solidarity for a fellow sufferer, a fellow lonely man whom nobody understands. So when he arrives at the thermal bath, Gorchikov finds that it has been drained for cleaning. This means he has a dry path across the water, like the Israelites fleeing across the parted waters of the Red Sea to their deliverance from slavery. Now, the 10-minute scene in the film is the longest single take in cinematic history. They filmed this, him walking from one side to the other, the actor, in a single take. The tension is almost unbearable as you watch it because the actor has to keep the flame from going out. When it does flicker out, Gorchikov goes back to the other side and starts again. So after a great struggle marked by the most intense focus, because this is the only time the writer, Gorchikov, forgets about himself, he finally makes it to the other side, plants the burning candle stub on the side of the pool, and then he collapses, dying of a heart attack. The final image of the film depicts Gorchikov lying on the ground in the nave of that ruined abbey of his dreams, with his Russian dacha behind him, where the altar in the church should be. Now, this is a mysterious, poetic image, one that I read, and it's open to interpretation, but I read as saying that we will only find full release from the painful limits of our mortal existence once we enter eternity, when we will have been delivered from time and the barriers that living in time in this mortal life impose on us. So that's the movie. Now, what does this tragic story of Gorchikov and nostalgia have to do with us? Let's consider the work of Ian McGillchrist, the contemporary psychiatrist, and his theory of brain hemispheres and culture. I'm sure most of you know this, but for those who don't, McGillchrist discusses how the brain's left hemisphere and its right hemisphere process information differently. To simplify McGillchrist's model, the right brain takes in raw sensory information, sends it to the left brain for logical analysis. Then the left brain sends its report back to the right for integration into a fuller picture of reality. But as McGillchrist sees it, in the modern West, we have become marooned in our left brains. The left brain is a powerful tool for giving us control over our environment, but the cost of doing so, the price we pay for that control, is immense. We have tricked ourselves into thinking in the modern age that the only sure knowledge is that which comes to us in a left brain mode. And this is where the scientific materialist worldview comes from. Yet that way of seeing the world only gives us a partial picture of full reality. And that, says McGillchrist, is in fact a less truthful one than the model provided by the right brain alone, which gains its knowledge intuitively. Now, to be clear, Ian McGillchrist says a healthy brain depends on both hemispheres. Our problem, and it's a problem across all of our culture, is that we have allowed ourselves to believe that truth is only what the left brain can know, only facts, things that can be empirically proven. In fact, said McGillchrist, the right brain is what allows us to engage in what our friend John Vervaeke calls participatory knowing. That is to say, the right brain reveals to us truths that come to us not as propositions, but as poetry, as art, as religious ritual, as music, and so on. So in the film, our hero Gorchikov is shipwrecked in his left brain. He's an intellectual who broods on the problem of communication across barriers. Now, this is not just about Russian culture versus Italian culture. This is about men and women, about God and man, about all the limits that we naturally experience in our mortality that stand in the way of a sense of wholeness and harmony, the individual and the community, sanity and insanity. Gorchikov is so lost in thinking about utopia, in a sense, that is, how to overcome all those limitations to wholeness and harmony, that he's blind to what is right in front of him, calling out to him. He can't hear the voice of God. He can't see the presence of God, even as he's begging God silently to show yourself to me, to speak to me, because he's just looking at the ground and not up towards heaven. There's strong symbolism there. To be precise, the writer is so busy trying to think his way out of his crisis that he's blind to all the other ways out, other escape routes that are opening up before him, but he can't see them. Now, Ian McGillchrist has said that the ways of escaping our own left brain captivity are corporeal, religious, and aesthetic, that is, through beauty. All of these things, the body, religious faith and ritual, and beauty, call us out of ourselves, away from what Martin Buber called the I-it relationship towards an I-thou one. Here's the McGillchrist passage that illustrates what I'm getting at. This is Ian. What ultimately unites the three realms of escape from the left hemisphere's world, which it has attacked in our time, the body, the spirit, and art, is that they are all vehicles of love. Perhaps the commonest experience of a clearly transcendent power in most people's lives is the power of eros, but they may also experience love through art or through spirituality. Ultimately, these elements are aspects of the same phenomenon, for love is the attractive power of the other, which the right hemisphere experiences, but which the left hemisphere does not understand and sees as an impediment to its authority. Ian goes on. Through these assaults of the left hemisphere on the body, on spirituality, and on art, essentially mocking, discounting, or dismantling what it does not understand and cannot use, we are at risk of becoming trapped in the I-it world, with all the exits through which we might rediscover the I-thou world being progressively blocked off. Close quote. So we see this in Gorchikov's life in ways I've already mentioned. We see this in Dominico's life. He was so terrified of losing his family in an apocalypse that he basically killed the family, so to speak, as a family unit by trapping them in a house for 7 years to impose his control on them for what he thought was their own good, but he destroyed what he couldn't control. His desperation to control the flow of experience manifests today in his crackpot attempt to collect all the water that drips through the roof of his hovel. And we see this too in Eugenia's life. She wants to be happy. She desperately wants to be happy. And she holds her ultimate happiness to be romantic, finding a partner. But as we know from that first scene, she thinks she can find happiness on her own terms. She's unwilling to sacrifice for it, even to bend the knee once. Towards the end of the film, we see that she has made a choice of a partner who pretty obviously can't bring her happiness. She has chosen badly and has gone into a snare because she has been misled by her own illusions of control. She's been misled about what love really is. Tarkovsky tells us in this film of two things that led to Gorchikov's liberation from the prison of his left brain. The first was Gorchikov's surrender to life's flow, a surrender that took place inside that ruined church that was flooded, through which a clear spring runs. The ruined buildings in this film all symbolize the Tower of Babel, man's failed attempt to create perfection on earth, to reach heaven under his own power. Gorchikov's drunken burning, sacrificial burning of the poetry translations inside the ruined temple symbolize his making a sacrifice of his utopian dream of perfect control, of perfect communication, manifest as nostalgia for a perfected past or a perfected future. And this opens the door to the second part of his liberation. Gorchikov's act of love and solidarity with a suffering madman. The ritual of crossing the path with the lit candle makes no obvious sense. Gorchikov did it simply to honor his promise to Dominico. In preparing the actor to play that scene, Tarkovsky told him to imagine that candle across the drained pool symbolizes man's pilgrimage through life. That is, the struggle to keep moving, to keep carrying that flame out of sacrificial love for others. Of course, Gorchikov dies at the end, so what did he actually accomplish? Symbolically, I believe Tarkovsky is telling us, in part through that iconic last image, that the only way to gain our life is to lose it. Or as Jesus put it in Matthew 10, verse 39, the one who finds his life will lose it, and the one who loses his life because of me will find it. Now, there's a strict Christian interpretation of this film, but I think a somewhat broader interpretation is one we can gain from having read Ian McGillchrist, that it is only through sacrificial love that we can escape our inner prison. Not just love in the sense of mere eros, of mere desire, that's Eugenia's error, but rather sacrificial love, love of God and love of other people. To do that, we have to join poor drunk Gorchikov in the flooded church and surrender our desire to fully control experience. The social scientist Hartmut Rosa has a theory of what he calls resonance, which corresponds to what I call in my book, Living in Wonder, enchantment. Rosa says that the way to overcome the alienation and meaninglessness that so many of us feel in the modern world is to reestablish a meaningful connection with the world outside our heads. He defines resonance as a dynamic, reciprocal relationship between oneself and the world outside your head. In liturgy at a great cathedral, or standing in front of a mountain gorge, listening to Bach's B minor Mass, baking a perfect loaf of sourdough bread for your family, resting in the arms of your beloved, or playing in the backyard with your kids, all of these are examples of experiencing resonance. So how do we become resonant? That's the thing. You can't command it or control it. The best we can do is to make ourselves open for resonant encounters and experiences. You cannot resonate with a person or a thing if you don't see them. That is, if you don't place yourself in some way in front of them, if you don't enter into the arena. In the film's opening scene, remember, Gorchikov couldn't bring himself even to enter into the country church to see the painting. Eugenia did go in, but she refused to put herself in a receptive mindset, which might have allowed her to see the truths really present not only in that fresco, but in the ritual the simple peasant women were performing. She would not sacrifice control of the situation and her own very modern interpretation of what was happening there. Put another way, she was unwilling to risk being changed by visiting that church. So for her, resonance was impossible. In the same way, Gorchikov is so locked into his controlling left brain way of seeing the world that he could not perceive God reaching out to him. When in that dream sequence, St. Catherine asked the Lord to answer him, Gorchikov's prayer, the Lord asked, what would he do if I spoke to him? That question implies, the poor man is calling on me, but he's really not open to hearing from me. Resonance or enchantment requires openness to experience. into being changed by experience. And this implies accepting uncertainty, accepting risk, and accepting imperfection. To make the quest for perfection our goal in this life is to close ourselves off not only to the capital G good, but also to miss the indirect ways that we must approach temporal bliss. It's a paradoxical truth. If you want to be truly happy, you got to give up the search for happiness. Finally, being able to live resonantly requires accepting that resonance flows in and out of our lives, just like water. You can't capture it and make it permanent. The fact that we are incapable of dwelling within enchantment or resonance as a permanent state does not mean that the world is ultimately meaningless. It rather means that we are limited creatures. We're bound in time. We're given only to fleeting glimpses of bliss that await us in eternity. This, I think, is why Gorchikov, though he dies in the end after a seemingly pointless gesture, is a kind of hero. In 1981, J.R.R. Tolkien mused in his diary about what people could learn from stories in which the hero was, quote, a total loser. Tolkien concluded, quote, truth does not exist in itself. It lies in the method. It is the way. The way. This is the secret of participatory knowing, that we only really discover the truths that make life worth living through experiencing them. Gorchikov's intellectual ruminations got him nowhere. It was only when he stepped out of his mind, driven by agape love for a suffering stranger, and started walking across that pool, that our hero left the slavery he experienced in his own personal Egypt and started his pilgrimage in his heart and in his frail body with its weak heart to the promised land. Tolkien's line about the truth being not a proposition, but rather the, quote, method, the, quote, way, is a very orthodox Christian insight. In this view, the truth is only truly apprehended, made manifest in the act of living it out, which includes the quest for it. Yeah, Gorchikov dies at the end, but his failure is an important one, for it manifests a saving truth. Nostalgia also insists, and this is a really big theme of Tarkovsky's, that only through sacrifice can we open the door to the transcendent. The final image of Nostalgia has snow falling into the ruined abbey, which has no roof, remember. It brings to mind a line from Tarkovsky's great 1966 film, Andrei Rubliov, in which the title character, a medieval iconographer, a monk who paints icons, stands in a church that has just been sacked by the Mongols. He stands there in the ruins of the burning and the sacked church as the snow begins to fall. Now, he has just received a visit from the ghost of his former master, the iconographer Theophanes, who tells Andrei Rubliov, the iconographer, that his mission in life is to proclaim God through creating beauty in the midst of evil, brutality, and destruction. In other words, he tells him that you have to, in your art, your sacred duty is to create images that reveal transcendent truth and give people, through beauty, a reason to hope and to bear their suffering. But the iconographer doesn't, at that point in the movie, he can't receive this. In that scene, Andrei Rubliov, the iconographer's final line is this. He says it as he's looking up at snow coming through the ruined roof, quote, nothing is more terrible than snow falling in a temple, terrible in the sense of awe-inspiring. So think about it. If snow falls in a temple, it means that the barrier protecting what is holy from the natural world has been breached. To see snow falling in a temple is a sign of grave disorder and destruction. But as we see in both Nostalgia and Andrei Rubliov, snow is beautiful, snow is light, snow is graceful. Snow is water, symbolizing the uncontrollable flow of life, transformed into something light and full of grace. What makes snow falling in a temple so terrible, again, the Russian word used here means awe-inspiring, is not only does it mean that something holy has been profaned and destroyed, but also that grace and beauty can emerge through that destruction. Is this not the meaning of the crucifixion and the resurrection? that the sacrifice of the Son of God in Jerusalem was necessary to rend the veil and to open the barrier between eternity and this mortal world. That sacrifice, the choice to suffer with meaning, is our shared language, and only through sharing that suffering in mutual love can we truly speak to each other, heart to heart. As the poet W.H. Auden commanded, "You shall love your crooked neighbor with your crooked heart." What we see in Nostalgia is Gorchikov's transformation from a tourist into a pilgrim. Well, what do I mean by that? The social theorist Zygmunt Bauman said that in ages past, everybody thought of themselves as pilgrims, that is, people whose journey through life was ordered, meaningful, and collective. In modern times, though, we have become tourists, people who navigate the world not along a prescribed path with other people, but driven only by our individual desires to escape boredom, to find happiness. For the tourist, the greatest fear is that he will be bored. For the pilgrim, the greatest fear is that he will lose the path, and he will lose his fellow pilgrims and fail to make it to his sacred destination. The tourist experiences the world and everything in it as something to be consumed. The pilgrim, by contrast, experiences the world and everything in it as an icon pointing to God, who awaits him at the end of the long journey. Or if not God, then at least ultimate meaning. Our task today is to sacrifice our lives as tourists and learn how to be pilgrims. This requires metanoia, the Greek word meaning change of mind, and sometimes translated as repentance. Changing our mind means sacrificing a desire for complete control of experience, and instead to open ourselves to serendipity and to grace. It also requires a willingness to put aside our quest for happiness and to seek something deeper. That something deeper cannot be reached ultimately through propositional thinking, but through living out the mystery of our life together in participatory knowing and in charity, even agape. At the end of the Divine Comedy, Dante gives us an image of perfection and harmony in eternity, in which only at the end of time, only when time is no more and we are in heaven, will the scattered leaves of our temporal lives be ordered into a single book. This is also, I think, the meaning of the final image of Nostalgia. If we want to experience bliss in this life, we must accept that we will only experience reunification of the fragments in the next life. Only when we pass into eternity will it all be gathered in. But in this life, we can find a kind of unity by, in the words of T.S. Eliot, shoring up the fragments against our ruin. But this is more than simply a strategy of endurance, at least for Christians. We seek not only endurance, but redemption. This is the meaning of snow falling in the temple, of the white feather that falls through the broken roof of that temple on Gorchikov as he stands drunkenly in the ruined church full of water. It's a symbol of healing beauty and grace that can pour through our wounds, if only we allow it. Tarkovsky's Nostalgia tells us to set aside the dream world of an uncomplicated past or the perfectly controlled future or the grass is always greener over there, and to live fully open right here, right now, open to sacrificial love in this moment with the people we find right in front of us. This is not easy, especially to focus on what's right in front of us, to get out of your head and to pour yourself into where you are. This is exceptionally difficult, and trust me, I say this as somebody who by nature is standing back, always observing. But it's the only way. In closing, let me quote Tarkovsky saying what he admires in both Gorchikov and the madman Dominico, who ends his own life in a gruesome, ill-considered sacrifice, which, by the way, means that just as not all erotic attraction is a way to love, not all forms of sacrifice are life-giving. The director said of his two tragic searchers, quote, "Let us say that what I like the most in them is the confidence with which the madman acts and the tenacity of the traveler, that is Gorchikov, in his attempts at achieving a greater level of understanding. That tenacity could also be called hope." Thanks very much.
Thank you.